Dr. Jasser.
Thank you, Chairman King. And I hope, you know, what I gained from this and what we all should gain is that this is the beginning of a conversation. We, as somebody that loves my faith, and I do this from an aspect of I really think that there's nothing more pro-Islamic or pro-Muslim than helping us get through figuring out radicalization, knowing that it's not just a final step, but there's a process, and that we want to begin the process of healing that pathology that exists, that's in a minority, but yet is a pathology and needs a modernization and needs reform. This needs a national conversation, it needs platforms like this and others, and it needs a political will to deal with it, and it needs a patient and understanding and thoughtful communication process that doesn't label anyone that discusses this as being Islamophobic or hateful, and understands that there are those of us within the community, the vast majority, that want to deal with this but have not had the resources or the platforms to do so. So thank you for the opportunity, and I hope this is the beginning of a national conversation.
Community.
Congressman, some people believe that you are not addressing the real cause of this Islamic extremism. You are just addressing the symptoms. And these symptoms are found all over in the Muslim world, where a lot of politicians win election on the basis of their opposition to Israeli foreign policy. By not giving them right training to their own children, when these children come to the America, they are already brainwashed. They have mindset that, okay, these bad things are done by certain people. So by not issuing those addresses or just criticizing CARE and DISNA, aren't you just addressing the symptom rather than cause of the problem?
No. First of all, as part of a democracy, you don't carry out terrorist attacks if you deal with if you disagree with American foreign policy. I think Dr. Jasser can address this more than I can because he lives in that community. But the fact is, the one point we're trying to make at the hearing today, that if you are part of American society, if you are in American society, you have an obligation to abide by the laws of that society and work within it and not look for excuses to justify murder and carnage the way too many people have done when it comes to terrorist attacks. So Dr. Jasser, you may want to address that.
Yeah, and actually, as I said in my testimony, I think we're giving much too much credit to one organization. There's a number of issues, but one of the main issues is understanding the root cause, walking back. The narrative so far about radicalization has been focused on the final step of violence, and we still just call it violent extremism. There's a long process before that, and we need to walk it. If we're going to make our country safer, we need to walk it back to that separatism, the identity issue, and we haven't addressed that and how to create an ideology, help Muslims create an ideology that's American, rooted in the ideas of this country, and create a process for that. As far as foreign policy issues, there will always be excuses that some of these groups make for terrorism, and ultimately, if you look, the root cause is a supremacist mentality that these individuals have, and they use foreign policy issues as an excuse.
Over here, please.
Yeah.
Is there a Muslim organization in your research that you would nominate or offer up to be representative of the kind of campaign of deterrence you have in mind?
Well, it's not for me to pick, but I would say certainly organizations such as Dr. Jasser's would be ideal. But it's not for me. That, as Dr. Jasser said, this is really something to be determined within the American Muslim community. But certainly from my perspective as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee and as someone who comes from an area which lost hundreds of people, if not thousands, on September 11th, I would say a group such as Dr. Jasser's is certainly what I would find most compatible as far as trying to address the internal issues and also how that plays out as far as the general American public is concerned. So, but again, Dr. Jasser has a lot of work to do. I'm not trying to impose more on him, but I would certainly say that from my perspective, that's the case. Let me also add, as far as whether it's anecdotal and as far as Mr. B, Mr. Bledsoe, and as far as Dr. Jasser's organization, we spent months preparing for this hearing. We interviewed dozens of witnesses all over the country. And the three we brought together here today, we thought crystallized what we learned from talking to these many witnesses. And so that was the purpose of the hearing today. I think it was successful. And the fact that all of you are still here, I guess it went okay. Yes.
Do you worry that these hearings and just this entire conversation itself may have a subliminal negative impact on people's psyche and their view towards Muslims?
Well, the question was, do I fear these hearings may have a subliminal impact, I guess, against the Muslim community? No, I would certainly hope not. And I would tell you, I think the way myself and the other members of the committee, the way we've conducted ourselves in the lead up to this hearing, the way the hearing was conducted today, there's absolutely no reason for anyone to worry about any impact, subliminal or otherwise. if there should be any impact, it was the mindless hysteria that pervaded the media and the airwaves over the last several weeks. That, to me, if there's any impact we have to worry about, it's how this, again, this mindless, baseless string of accusations and hysteria pervaded really the airwaves and the news media, print, and everything over the last several weeks. So no. And also, let me say, in a democracy, I believe that putting the facts on the table is the best way to address these issues. As several witnesses mentioned, including, I believe, Mr. Bledsoe, there's an elephant in the room. No one wants to talk about it. We talked about it today.
How many more do you want?
So, Chairman,
Allow the Muslims to.
absolutely, yeah.
Why don't we allow the Muslim members of the panel to respond to your question about the impact of this hearing?
Yeah, you know, I think there's nothing, it's interesting, I would ask all of you, do you feel that there's been a diversity of ideas from Muslims in America in the past few years? Or have they appeared to be monolithic and basically of one mindset? And I think that's what you've learned today, is that there's diversity. When you ask about organizations, it's not just mine. There's the American Islamic Congress. There's a Center for Islamic Pluralism. There's a group called Free Muslims. There's a group called the Islamic Supreme Council of America. There's other groups that are not part of the Islamist movement or the Brotherhood type movement that are all American Muslim organizations like mine that have similar ideologies, that are looking for reform, looking for modernization, and we're not a monolithic community. So I think there's nothing more pacifying to any type of behaviors from America that might be you know, more rash than to see diversity in Muslim community. I think that's more calming, actually.
Okay, do you think you're treating the Muslim American community as one single monolith? Is this a Somalian issue and not a Muslim issue? What do you have to say to people who compare you to McCarthy and call you the McCarthy of the 21st century?
Well, I would basically say that question reflects the mindless hysteria that's pervaded the media for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I would say, look at today's hearing. And I challenge anyone to find anything that was improper about today's hearing, anything that was not done in a totally professional way. We went out of our way. We actually had 3 members who are not even on the committee, Democrats, allowed them to sit and take part in it. I urged Keith Ellison, who was not a member of the committee, gave him unlimited time to speak before the committee hearing. And I think all of us realize that there is no monolithic Muslim community. There's a Somali community, there's many others, which is one of the reasons why we had Dr. Jasser here today to talk about the breadth and scope of the Muslim American community. And I wish the media would realize that the Muslim community is not a monolith and would start looking, again, find some of this diversity, which Dr. Jasser and Mr. Behe personified today. If they want to add anything, they can.
You've been trying to make this distinction that this is about terrorism and violence and not about religion. And Dr. Jasser is held up as the person who's speaking about religion, and you had said, quote, Muslims are not, I think you said, not intellectually prepared or not intellectually sophisticated from a religious standpoint. How are you going to keep, I can read you back the actual quote, but it's something almost along those lines. How are you going to keep this discussion as it's going from not going into theology? Because, I mean, you and I have spoken before, and you are interested in reform of theology. So are we going to start seeing Congress investigating Islamic theology?
That's a great question. And for example, I know there's problems in Sharia as far as separating mosque and state. I wouldn't be the person to do that. When I did say that, I'm talking about myself. I'm not going to be the intellectual to separate mosque and state in Sharia, because you need a new school of thought. The 4 schools of thought in Sunni Islam that I practice right now, if you look at their legalisms about government, about crimes, for criminal activity, for the weight that a woman's vote gets in court, all of these things.
That's in all traditional scriptures. That's also in any traditional scripture.
Well, the West has reformed that. Well, Islam, I believe, the traditional schools of thought need to reform that. And we need to create a platform for that to happen, because that's the root cause of terrorism, is that separation. And I don't see why our government can't get into allowing Muslim organizations the platforms to do that. It's not that the government's going to do the reform. Muslims will do it. Because if we keep having terror acts that may happen, the political will may change to where government ends up getting involved inappropriately. And that's why I'm so motivated to do this, is because if we don't fix it, government may end up doing it, and that would be wrong. So I think they can build platforms to do that. Prime Minister Cameron talked about Britain doing the same thing, doing a muscular liberalism of getting liberty into the Muslim mindset and identifying with British ideas. I don't think that's inappropriate.
Thank you all very much.